Well, good morning, everybody. Welcome to our Wednesday encouragement. And here's our encouraging thought for the day. 37 years ago last week, a man you've never heard of saved your life. And I'm not talking about Jesus. We're going to finish the thought from this past Sunday's communion meditation in just a second. But really quickly, I want to make a correction to something I said and remind you of a couple of things that are going on. First of all, I said last week that our congregation meeting was this coming Sunday, October 11th. I was wrong about that. I apologize. It's actually next Sunday, October 18th. So I guess if I'm going to mess it up, at least I got it earlier and, there's more time. You should have gotten a letter about that, but I misspoke and I gave the wrong date. So just to reiterate, it's not this coming Sunday, the 11th. It's next Sunday, the 18th, where we'll vote on officers for 2021. Now, I was right about the crop walk being this coming Sunday. We're providing the rest and refreshment station as we usually do. And so if you'd like to donate snacks for that, we're asking that you donate prepackaged cookies and crackers and power bars, whatever, that we can put out in as safe a manner as possible. And we're going to have that station open from 1 to 4. So if you'd like to come a little early at about 12:30 and help us set up, or staff it during the time it's open, or come and help clean up around 3:45, any of that would be great. And there's going to be a youth outing at a local corn maze on Sunday, October 25th, right after the service. And so if you have kids or grandkids who would like to go, we're going to have more details on that this coming weekend. And for the past few years, we've been providing Christmas presents for the children in the orphanage in Romania, run by Remember the Children. Well, with all things 2020, we're having to adjust for COVID. So instead of shopping for the presents, we're adopting a child for Christmas by donating $15 per child. We have envelopes marked for that at the information center, or you can mail or drop by your donation if you'd like to participate. If you want to drop it by, just call first and I can come out and pick it up for you. But we want to make Christmas great for these kids. And be sure to check your Facebook page regularly. This month, we're highlighting the different missions that we support. You can learn more about those on our Facebook page and the work that they do. And we encourage you to make them a part of your prayer time as well. Well, Sunday in the communion meditation, I mentioned a man you had never heard of who very possibly saved your life. His name was Stanislav Petrov. He was a lieutenant colonel in the Soviet Air Defense Forces outside of Moscow on September 26, 1983, when a freak alignment of sunlight on high-altitude clouds was detected by a Soviet satellite and interpreted by their computer systems as a nuclear missile launch against the Soviet Union. Now, as the duty officer that day, Petrov was supposed to immediately notify Yuri Andropov, the leader of the Soviet Union at the time. Now, Andropov was notoriously paranoid, especially when it came to President Reagan. Some of you remember a few months after this when Reagan was about to make his weekly radio address, and he was a jokester, and during the sound check, he joked with technicians saying, "My fellow Americans, I'm pleased to tell you today that I've signed legislation that will outlaw Russia forever. We begin bombing in 5 minutes." Well, it wasn't broadcast live, but the signal was going out to the radio stations, and some of them had already started to record, even though they weren't broadcasting it. And it was leaked and caused a bit of a stir, to say the least. So this was a time of high tension between the U.S. and the Soviet Union. The Cold War was warming up. The Soviets had recently shot down a Korean Airlines plane that had a U.S. congressman on board, and NATO had announced that it was moving missiles into Western Europe to be in range of the Soviet Union. So there's little doubt that the Soviet Union would have launched a missile strike against the U.S. in retaliation. And that would have led to a retaliation by the U.S., and millions of lives would have been lost. But fortunately for us, Colonel Petrov wasn't one to react without thinking. Even though the monitoring system said it was a missile strike, something didn't feel right to him. He said, "I had a funny feeling in my gut. I didn't want to make a mistake." He said the computer only detected 5 missiles, and he believed that if it really were a preemptive strike by the U.S., that there would have been far more missiles than that. He said, quote, "When people start a war, they don't start it with only 5 missiles. You can do little damage with just 5 missiles. And so instead of reporting the alarm, he and his staff waited for the radar to confirm what the satellites were reporting. Now, this was no easy thing. I mean, Soviet technology at the time wasn't as advanced as the US's, and they would only have minutes to launch a retaliatory strike. So they were trained to report an alarm like this immediately so they could at least get some missiles launched in return. Patience in this circumstance could have been costly. In an interview years later, Petrov said, "We knew that every second of procrastination took away valuable time that the Soviet Union's military and political leadership needed to be informed without delay. All I had to do was to reach for the phone to raise the direct line to our top commanders, but I couldn't move. I felt like I was sitting on a hot frying pan." Can you imagine how tense that was, waiting for the radar to show if it really was a strike or not? Was he right or was he wrong? As close as we live to Washington, D.C., we all need to say a prayer of thanks that Colonel Petrov was willing to be patient and look at things carefully and not just have a knee-jerk reaction to what he first saw. Human nature is to react to things without really examining them to make sure what our eyes and ears first tell us is true. I mean, how many times do we read about an incident in the paper and we see people respond vehemently and then later learn details that cast the situation into an entirely different light? How many times have you heard a story or a report about someone doing or saying something and said, "That's stupid," without ever examining the facts to make sure there's not a reasonable explanation or that the story as you heard it maybe was not completely true? If I had a nickel for every time I've done that, well, let's just say I wouldn't be driving a Honda Fit. I'd have a car people would look at and say, "Whoa, look at that," instead of, "Huh, isn't that cute?" And social media makes things even worse. Before all that stuff existed, I might say something, but only the people around me heard it. Now people get on Twitter or Facebook and rant about things and it gets retweeted over and over and starts trending and it creates a frenzy. And when facts come out that would explain or contradict that reaction, the damage has already been done. And deleting a tweet doesn't put the genie back in the bottle. We all jump to conclusions. We all make judgments about things without really examining them from time to time. In AA, it's called contempt prior to investigation. And you'd think that as many times as we do that and then later find out there's a reasonable explanation or there are additional facts that provide much needed context, that maybe we learn to be more patient before we act or pronounce judgment. But it's a lesson we have trouble learning. But I believe that we can do a lot to change the world around us if we would just learn to do better with this. And let me say, I'm speaking to myself first and foremost, okay? Because I can be chief among sinners in this. But instead of saying, "That's stupid," or "That's the dumbest thing I've ever heard," maybe say, "Yeah, I'm not seeing that," or "I don't get that at all." Maybe even look deeper to make sure we know all the facts. Think of how that changes the tenor of conversations just by responding thoughtfully instead of negatively. Because when you respond more thoughtfully, others are much less likely to be negative too. And if there's anything we can learn from Colonel Petrov, it's that it's important to be patient and examine the facts before we react. Because if he hadn't, a lot of us wouldn't be here today. Leave it to a guy named Stan to save the world.